Welcome back, Java learners. I'm Brian Rearmans, a Bloom Tech instructor, bringing you day 7 of Let's Build a Sketch App. Today, we're going to continue looking at classes and think about how to borrow code from one class and put it into the other. They have a lot of the same properties. We should have borrowed code from one and bring it into the other. What are we going to build? Today, we'll introduce a new button that lets us change the color of our pen. We're eventually going to want many of these color-changing buttons to allow for a variety of pen color choices. But how much code would be similar between our button, which clears our drawing, and our button, which will change the pen color? And how do we let each of these buttons share code so it does not need to be rewritten? That's what we're going to look at today. Let's go ahead and get started.
We're about to do something that on the surface seems easy, but in the background, there's actually a lot to learn. Just like there was a lot to learn with classes, we have to break this into multiple different days of knowledge because it's a lot. And right now, I just want you to get a feel for it. Later, deep dive. If you decide to keep going with Java, deep dive into it, figure out what this all means. It's not so bad. It's just there's a lot to learn. And so we're going to look at the idea that we have a clear button. And at the moment, when I draw on my screen, I can click that clear button and it clears the screen. Well, what if I'd like to have a different button, one that has a different capability? Maybe I can have a button that when you click it, it switches from a pen to a highlighter, or switches to a drawing for a rectangles, or drawing for stars. I'd like to have that capability of buttons that do that. Today, we're going to add in buttons that when you click them, it'll change the current pen color. So at the moment, our pen is completely randomized every moment of time, and it looks a little silly, like a child's pen that has capabilities of drawing all over the place. Maybe you love that, but for a drawing app, for an actual painting program, I like to be able to choose the color I'm using at the moment, so I can sketch with only browns and then sketch with blues and make the picture I want. And so at the moment, let's start right away by deleting the code that makes it random. So in your sketchpad.java, find the update, and this first set of code right here was the one that said, hey, generate a random color for a pen. And we're going to delete that. I'm also going to delete the comment that goes with it. Just get rid of it. And now we'll be back to a pen still works, but it will no longer have 1,000 colors. All right. And so what we just done, we just made it so that our pen is one color. Why did it choose red? That's interesting. And that is because the last time we chose a color was right here when we did the slash through our color. We could go over to our clear button right now and decide, hey, yeah, we're doing a color.red line, but maybe we'll switch it back over to whatever color we want to, so that after drawing that, we'll make it maybe a black pen. Black is probably the default color for a lot of pens. So we can add that in, and we can make our program just a tiny bit better, but it still doesn't have the ability to set the color ourselves. It's just going to be automatically chosen for us by the program. And so here we have a black color pen. We no longer have randomized. Looks a little better. Maybe this would be perfect for a program where it's like, sign your name. And as you're trying to sign your name, you're doing your Brian, whatever it is, you realize, I don't like that. You can reset. That's great. I've used that kind of thing when I go shopping. But we want to make a drawing pad that's a little bit better where we can actually change the colors. To do that, we need to make more buttons. And so our goal, create other buttons. But first, we have to think, would it be as simple as just copying and pasting this clear button into another class and then changing the code? Yeah, it could be. That's such a waste. Especially when you start thinking, what if I wanted other buttons in the future? Like I want buttons for drawing rectangles and circles and stars and other shapes, highlighters, whatever. Why would I want to copy and paste the same code over and over and over again when I could instead think, what code in here would be common to all buttons? And that's our next step. What we're about to do is make something called a parent class or a super class or base class. There's so many different names for these. So what we want to do is we think, what would a clear button and a color button, something that changes the colors of the pens, have in common? And so we can start looking through here and realize, okay, what in here would have in common? They probably both have mouse info and paint capabilities. They probably all have the ability to have a coordinate system where they're at and how big they are, and their background color is all going to be the same. They all have the ability to be created and probably given all that information. They probably have the ability to draw themselves, but I think this part right here is probably unique, that this is going to be that red slash that slashes through our clear button. I don't think a regular color button would have it. It would almost look like I don't want a blue because I'm going to slash through a blue box and say, I don't want that. So I'm thinking this is probably not something that's common. So I'm going to do is I'm going to comment that out by holding down my control key or my command key, depending on your system, and hitting the / and saying, I think that's not going to be code that's going to be common between all of them. All right, they're all going to have the ability to check to see if they're pressed. That's great. That's perfect code. No matter what kind of button you are, no matter where you're at, they're all going to use the exact same code for being pressed. They're all going to say, if I'm updating, if I'm pressed, perform their action, but will they have the same action? The answer is no. A clear button's action is to draw a big white rectangle on the screen so it clears the screen. Whereas a color button for the pen, the action will be to literally just change the pen color So the next time it draws lines, it won't be black anymore. It'll be red or green or blue, whatever it is. And the rest of these actions are get colors and get X's and get Y's. Those are all assigned. So really, this is a unique situation. This one right here is unique. So I'm going to comment that out by, again, holding my control or my command key, hitting // and saying, that's going to be unique. Everything else in here is going to be the exact same thing for any kind of button. So let's not call this a clear button anymore. Let's call this a generic button. And because they're squares, I'm going to call it SquareButton. So I'm going to change the word clear to square. I'm also going to change it from clear to square right here and say, hey, if you ever want a square button, this is the code a SquareButton uses. We have a problem. That is that this SquareButton has to be in a file called SquareButton. And if I go over to my sidebar and I find the buttons, that file name right now is still ClearButton. And it's got to be a perfect match. This is a Java specific thing. That class name has to match the file name. And so I'm going to just go ahead and hit this ... next to the buttons and say rename. I'm going to rename that to SquareButton. This is now our parent class. And what we want to do next is realize, what is a child class? If this is a parent, what's the child? And what does it mean to be a child? All right, so we now have is the parent. Let's make a child. To do that, I'm going to make a new button entirely. So in your side panel, we're going to go to the buttons. We're going to say ... We're going to add a file. And this time we're going to make one. We're going to rename another one that we just had. We're going to create the ClearButton again. ClearButton.java in particular. Make sure you have the .java on there. Hit enter and you'll have another file. I'd like to have both of these open simultaneously. So I'm going to open this in a new tab. I'm actually going to pull the SquareButton over to my right side so I can kind of see these simultaneously and see what's about to happen. So we have a ClearButton. We have a SquareButton. The SquareButton, Replit apparently saved the old work, so I'm going to go ahead and delete most of this, my ClearButton, because I don't actually want all that code in there. But here we go. We have a SquareButton on the right, and we have a ClearButton on the left, and the ClearButton currently has nothing. So what we're going to start doing is we're going to write code in here to build a ClearButton from nothing. And we're going to look at a lot of code from the SquareButton, but basically from nothing. Let's start with just highlighting this top grouping right here, including the public class SquareButton. Let's copy and paste that in there. And what this is saying is that they're both part of the buttons package. All that means is that they're located in this particular directory. They both import the ability to use colors and mouse info and painting tool. It may not need it. We'll find out later. But I think this one's going to be called not SquareButton, but instead ClearButton. Now, normally, if you're going through a full lesson, you learn every piece of this from beginning to end. But we're just kind of scratching the surface here to figure out what's going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and down and hit a curly bracket to say the ClearButton class starts here and the ClearButton class ends there. And I think, well, okay, if ClearButton is going to be a child of SquareButton, there's one thing we need to add into this code that you probably don't know yet, which is a word that's going to right here called extends. And what that means is that ClearButton extends the functionality of another class. And which class? SquareButton. And how I read that now is it says ClearButton is a SquareButton. It's just going to be a better version of it, or not necessarily better, but a different version. It's more specific. So think about your parents. They've made you, and you are a more specific version of them, sort of. It's kind of the concept. By doing that, we get to borrow all of the code that SquareButton has. So right now, we've basically said, hey, I got all of this stuff, all of it. We don't have the ability to access all of it necessarily, but we have it all. It's part of us, with one exception. We do borrow. We get every one of the properties. They're all in the ClearButton. Unfortunately, they're all private, which means ClearButton directly can't access them. So it's like you own them, but you can't get to them. They're locked away. Your parents locked them from you. So there is a left X and a top Y for ClearButtons. We don't borrow constructors. It's the one thing that never gets borrowed. So we're going to have to write our own constructor. So let me go ahead and put that in here. Must write our own constructor. This is a comment. Come back to that. And we're basically going to copy and paste this and adjust it as needed. We do borrow this draw self. But what happens is that we only borrow the draw self that does this part of it, which is the rectangle, the square itself, and the background color and where it is. What we don't get to borrow is the stuff we commented out, which is fine because that's supposed to be unique for a ClearButton. So we are going to have to customize the draw self to work only on our stuff. So we're going to write custom draw self that does our part of the work, and we'll let our parents do the bigger part, the part that says draw the common square, and that's it. The is pressed, we're going to borrow that. And we're not going to write a single thing. We're going to have it, and we're not going to change it one bit. The update, we're not going to change it one bit. The perform action, yeah, we're going to update that. So we need to make our own version of a custom perform action method, so that the ClearButton does a specific type of action that a SquareButton, which isn't anything, it's a non-existing thing, like it's just an idea, it doesn't need to do that action. So we're going to put that in there. And the rest of these, we're just going to borrow them as is. So our goal right now is to finish these 3 steps. We need to write a constructor, write a custom draw self, and a custom perform action. Let's start with these 2 because they're much, much easier. So let's take a look. We want to perform these 3 things that we commented out earlier. That's the 3 things we want our ClearButton to do in addition to what the regular SquareButton does. So to do that, we're going to write the same method header, public void draw self, that they have. Exactly the same. If you'd like to be more job ready in terms of what you do, you would write @overrides on this. And that just says, I'm overriding what my parent does. Do you need to write that? No, but it's a signifier that says, hey, my parent already has this capability. I'm overriding it to say, this is my capability. This is what I want to do. And what I don't need to do is I don't need to copy all of this code, because I can just tell my parent, use your part of this. So the SquareButton is actually called the super class. It's the super, it's above me. And so what I can say is super dot. That's just like using a variable name, but my variable for my parent is always super. Super dot. Do one of these things. What do you want to do? I want you to call your draw self method. And that literally says, hey, parent, run that code for me. So we're going to get the rectangle on the screen that's got the colored background, that's got the nice size and the placement. Everything's going to be nice. That says, run the code that my parent has. Run my parent's code, because they already have the capability. But these 3 lines that we commented out, I'm going to take those, I'm going to copy them, and I'm going to put them over here. And I'm going to get rid of those comments and say, hey, those are what I want to have happen after my parent draws their specific square. So I'm getting the square from over here, and I'm asking it to run this set of code over there. Why is it yelling at me? Why is it saying no? And the answer is that 8 is a variable that technically I borrow, but it's private. I don't have access to it. And I could tell you how to make that access, but I'm going to do instead, I'm just going to copy it. So I need that paint to come over here as well. So I'm going to copy that and say, hey, put it in there. So now ClearButton definitely does have a paint variable as well. So it has the capability of doing all that. But what it doesn't have is left X, top Y, left X. It doesn't have all those variables. They're all in the parent. Well, that's a problem. Does that mean I just copy and paste these over here? I didn't even like doing it the first time. It's okay, but I didn't like doing it. The answer is no. If you have a super class, a parent class, you technically have access to everything they have if they gave it access to you. Now, they made it private, which is fine. It's actually the right way to code. But I don't have access to it in my child class because it's private. They've locked it away. But remember these getters down here, get color, get left X, get top Y. Those are public methods that let me directly access those values. I can't change the values, but I can access them. So instead of using left X, the value here, I'm going to call the method get left X with parentheses. Now I'm allowed to call that multiple different ways. I can call it exactly as you see, and I don't even have a get left X method, but because I extend SquareButton, I do have it borrowed. I am inheriting it. I can do the same thing here. Alternately, you could write super dot if you'd like to. Some people do like to write this and say, like, very specifically, I'm getting that from my parent, which is the same thing. So you can either write super dot or you can just write get top Y. Here, left X is going to be get left X. And size is going to be, finish this off yourself. Pause right here, finish this line. All right, it's going to be size, get size, the method. And then here it's going to be get top Y, the method. And then it's get size again. And it's super easy to make a mistake there. So make certain you pause and check yourself and say like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I need. But here's what we now have. We have a draw self that says, use the parent's code. What does the parent's code say to do? Parent code says, and my draw self literally just says, draw a rectangle, one rectangle. Then after that rectangle is drawn, I'd like to go ahead and draw a red slash. So the bottom part down here, draw the red slash, which is unique for our ClearButton. We have one more custom one to make, and that is the perform action. So let's do this one a little bit faster. We're going to take this code. We're going to copy it over here, paste it over there. We're going to go ahead and add the override. Not necessary, but I like to be thorough. And I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of these comments and say, hey, does that make sense? And the answer is yes. When perform action is asked to be done, these are the two things I like to do. And there we go. So we have just created a custom class with one last exception. We haven't done the constructor. So here we go. We need to make a constructor. Now the constructor is the one thing you do not borrow from a parent ever. So we're going to basically follow the format as that one over here, but write our own. So I'm going to copy and paste only this top line. Can you think of the one thing that probably needs to change right away? This constructor is not building a SquareButton, it's building a ClearButton. So I'm going to change that from Square to ClearButton. Everything else is going to be the same. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter and add my end curly bracket that says, hey, okay, start here, end there. Now we have to add one more thing here. To build a ClearButton, because it extends SquareButton, that means ClearButton is the child, SquareButton is the parent. Really, you have to build the parent, like to build the mold, and then customize that on top of it with the ClearButton. And to do that, without getting into the details here, we're going to add one line of code here that says super and parentheses. And what you're doing is you're running the parent's constructor. And look what the parent's constructor needs. It needs all four of these values. And so I'm just going to send in the exact same values I just received. I have an incoming X, incoming Y, incoming size, and incoming color. I'm just going to send that right to my parent and say, hey, here's the information you needed to build the mold so that I could build myself a little bit better. If this doesn't 100% make sense, that is perfectly valid. It's the first time you've seen this. It's super easy to not fully understand all of that, but follow along because we just needed to get it done. And that's it. There's nothing else unique about a ClearButton. Our code should probably still work exactly as it used to work. Let's test it. It seems like we've wasted our time because we literally just wrote code that just split it into two different locations. We have some code over here and some code over there. But what we have done more importantly is that we have made a SquareButton that says if any other buttons need to exist, we have a mold for that. So it is time to build a second button. Okay, we're about to build a button specifically for colors. So we have to think, how much of this is going to be the same? Let's see. It's going to say ColorButton instead of ClearButton. It's going to say ColorButton there instead of ClearButton. The draw self, we won't need any of that red slash. We don't need it at all. Actually, we don't need to draw self because a color is going to be a rectangle with a color in the interior. That's it. So actually, we can get rid of the entire draw self method entirely. The only thing that's going to be different about a ClearButton and a ColorButton, besides the way it draws, is the fact that this ColorButtons, the action is not going to be to clear the screen by drawing a big rectangle. It's instead going to be change the current color of the pen. So let's try it. We're going to go over here. We're going to do the buttons. We're going to say, let's build another one. So let's add a file. This time, let's call it a ColorButton.java to tell it it's a Java file. Hit enter. That'll open a new class called ColorButton. I'm going to go ahead and open the ClearButton in a new tab so I can see it. I'm going to copy this whole thing, paste it in, and realize I don't actually need all of that. So let's go back and look through it. Do we need the top part? Yes. This needs to change. It's telling us it's a red underline. Squiggly says there's something wrong with the code. This is a ColorButton, not a ClearButton. Change that to ColorButton. What about here? Same thing. Can't be a ClearButton. It's got to be a ColorButton. Okay. Do we need a customized draw self for our ColorButtons? The current code they would run if we don't write anything is this code right here that they get from their parent, because a ColorButton's parent is still SquareButton. And that says, set the black background outline, make the fill color, whatever the color is for our particular color, and draw it. That's exactly the code we want for our button. So we're going to get rid of this entirely and say, I don't need to override what my parent does. That's it. I don't need to write anything different about theirs. But the perform action is going to have to be unique. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the interior here and say, what is supposed to happen when a color button is pressed? Well, what's supposed to happen? It's supposed to change the current pen color. So I'm going to ask my painting tool, dot, and I'm going to say, set the line color to what value? What value do I want to be? Well, the value I want my line color to be is the value this color button is storing in the background, the actual color of this color button. Remember, a color button borrows everything its parent has, and so it has the ability to use these values, but not directly because they're private. Well, that one right there represents the color of this color button. Well, how do I get that value in here? I can't just write color because it's private. Instead, I look and see there's a method called getColor. My parent knows it. my parent actually knows what color I need to be. So I'm going to get color with parentheses and say, hey, that's it. And I'm going to go ahead and make that a little bit bigger so you can see it all. There's almost nothing in here. This is a specialized SquareButton called a ColorButton. It does everything a SquareButton does, except it has a specialized override that says, hey, when I'm asked to perform my action, this is the code I want to have run. All I need to do is change the color of the painting tool. That's it. Otherwise, all of my code is getting borrowed from there. Think about that. There's so much code that's borrowed from over here, and that is what is beautiful, what is called an object-oriented language. You can make a parent class that defines part of it, like the mold of it, and you can specialize that with smaller amounts of code in these other ones. Originally, this didn't make sense. If all we're talking about is a ClearButton versus a SquareButton, we might as well just add a ClearButton on its own. But now you're starting to see, oh, I didn't write very much. I actually wrote very, very little, and I have a new customized button. Now, we have one last step, which is, we don't have any color buttons on the screen. So why don't you think about this? Can you go to the sketchpad on your own and add some color buttons onto the screen and make them work? Take a moment, think about how we got the clear buttons to be on the screen and make them work. And see if you can do the same thing with a couple of color buttons. Maybe make two color buttons. Maybe make one that's maybe black, one that's maybe blue or red. Maybe two, maybe three. Put them on the screen somewhere and test them and see if they work. Here's what I would have done. Same idea as this before. I'm going to make a private variable called ColorButton this time. And I'm just going to call this one the first color button. So ColorButton 1, because I'm going to make multiple of these, equals a new color button. I have to think where it's going to be. And for the moment, I just want to put it somewhere. So I'm going to say, let's use similar numbers there, same size, but a little bit different. I'm going to put it further to the right. So I'm going to say maybe 30 pixels over, 5 down, 20 pixels wide. And I'm going to make it this one my black background. I'll make another one, copy that, paste it. This one's going to be ColorButton 2. Since it's 20 wide, I'll make this 50 over. So it's exactly 20 further from the right. And I'll make this one maybe red. And just because I could, I'll make one more. Copy that, paste it in, change this ColorButton 3. And I'll make it 70 pixels over. Now, these placement, all of these, this is what a front-end developer usually is worried about. Like, how does it actually look? And so we're teaching you Java, which is oftentimes used in the back-end development. And right now I'm just showing you some front-end styles of placing things. A lot of developers don't have to worry about what is it going to look like unless that is their job. So we've got these buttons and we don't have them doing anything because if you remember, I'm going to go ahead and move this off to the right here. We had to ask our ClearButton to draw itself. Well, our ColorButton is going to do the same thing. So ColorButton 1, draw itself. Our ColorButton 2, draw itself. And our ColorButton 3, draw itself. That will hopefully get them onto the screen, but there's one final step, which is, hey, they have code to run. We got to ask them to update. So when you come down here and say, hey, ColorButton 1 dot update, and ColorButton 2 update, and finally ColorButton 3. Oh man, that was a lot of work. Let's see what we got. All right, what did we get? We got a black, a red, and a red. Why? Because I forgot to make the third one change its color. So come up here and say, hey, let's make that one a blue pen. While I have it running, let's test it. We start with a black. We click red. We have a red pen. Click back. We have a black pen. Running it again with my black, red, and blue all set up. I have my black, I have my red, I have my blue, and I can switch back and forth between all of them, and I can erase whenever needed. That is pretty cool. Next step, we want to build lots and lots of buttons. Not more classes. We want to build lots of these colors. So we can actually have maybe color choices of 20 or 30 of these at once. I'm going to figure out how do we do that so we can get unique colors for each and every one of them.
Before we wrap up, think back 7 days ago. We were just starting with our Java-based Sketch app. You may never have used Java before, and look what you've built now. See, you can do this. We've just a few days left to build out our Sketch app, and your Java journey doesn't have to end there, though. If you want to continue learning this in-demand programming language, plus other skills that'll help you translate coding into a career you love, check out bloomtech.com/Java. Then click back here to Replit for your next steps, and let's build a Sketch app.